Good afternoon. Please settle in. I want to take you somewhere with me today, a place that exists now only in memory, in the sepia tones of old photographs, in the echo of voices long silent. Picture London in the 1950s, not the London you might imagine from films. No red double-deckers gleaming in sunshine, no jolly Cockney market vendors. The London I knew was gray, profoundly, insistently gray. The sky was gray. The buildings wore their bomb damage like scars, gray against grayer stone. Even the people seemed wrapped in grayscale. Those heavy wool coats, those careful expressions of a nation still rationing butter, still counting pennies, still remembering what it meant to stand alone against darkness. And in that gray world, I was learning something peculiar. I was learning that you could be two things at once. This is not a story about history, though I would spend my life telling histories. This is a story about what happens to a child who discovers that the world contains multitudes, that identity is not singular, but layered, complex, sometimes contradictory, that you can be Jewish and English, different and belonging, outside and inside simultaneously. I must tell you something. This discovery, this early awareness of living between worlds, it changed everything. Let me take you there. We lived in Marylebone first. My mother's people were Lithuanian Ashkenazi, Jews who had fled the pogroms, who carried with them the Yiddish language and the memories of shtetl life. My father came from a different tradition entirely, Sephardi, Turkish, Mediterranean. Two strands of Jewish experience, 2,000 years of separate wanderings, meeting in one household in post-war London. Already, you see the complexity. Already, you see the layers. The England I knew as a child was monochromatic in more ways than one. The dominant culture was Christian, obviously, but more than that. It was determinedly, almost aggressively homogeneous. There was a right way to speak, a right way to behave, a right way to be English, and we were not quite that. But here is what fascinated me. Even then, we were also not quite foreign. I went to English schools. I spoke English with the accent of London, not the accent of Vilnius or Istanbul. I walked English streets, ate English food when we weren't eating Jewish food, absorbed English culture. And yet, there was always this sense of living slightly to the side of the main narrative. You understand what I'm describing? This position of the almost insider. Let me show you how this manifested. In our home, Friday nights transformed the world. Suddenly, that gray London flat would fill with candlelight, with the smell of challah bread, with the ancient Hebrew blessings my mother spoke over the wine. The Sabbath arrived like a ship from elsewhere, bearing different rhythms, different languages, different ways of marking time. Come Saturday morning, the gray would return. But something had shifted. I learned early to code switch, though we didn't have that term then. I learned to move between worlds. At school, I was English. At synagogue, I was Jewish. At home, I was somehow both and neither. My father's Sephardi traditions, sometimes clashing with my mother's Ashkenazi customs, creating yet another layer of complexity. And books. Oh, the books. This is where the story becomes about light, about color, about discovering that history itself could be a kind of liberation from grayness. I remember discovering that English history, which I was taught at school as a progression of kings and battles and acts of parliament, was actually full of drama, full of human passion, full of stories as vivid as anything in the Bible. The Tudors weren't gray. Cromwell wasn't gray. The English Civil War, the Restoration, the Glorious Revolution, these were stories painted in crimson and gold. But it was Jewish history that truly illuminated things for me. Because Jewish history, I discovered, was a history of movement, of adaptation, of survival against extraordinary odds. It was a history that crossed continents and millennia. It contained Babylonian exile and Spanish golden ages. It contained rabbinical disputes and mystical revelations. It contained both the horror of persecution and the miracle of persistence. And suddenly, that gray London street didn't seem gray anymore. It seemed like one more chapter in an ancient, ongoing story. We moved to Southend-on-Sea when I was still quite young, then back to London. These geographic shifts, small on a map, significant to a child, reinforce something I was already learning. Identity is not fixed, place is not destiny. You can carry your world with you, and you can also adopt new worlds. And somehow, both things can be true simultaneously. In Southend, I remember standing on the seafront, looking out at the Thames estuary, and thinking about my grandparents' journeys. The Baltic for my mother's family, the Mediterranean for my father's. All that water, all that displacement, all that arriving and re-arriving. I was British. I was unquestionably British. Born here, raised here, formed by this landscape and this language. But I was also the grandson of immigrants, the inheritor of diasporic memory, the carrier of a tradition that predated England itself by millennia. You may be thinking, this is a familiar immigrant story. And yes, it is. But I want you to understand something crucial. This was not about feeling torn between two identities. It was not about being neither one thing nor the other. It was about discovering that identity itself is plural, multifaceted, always in conversation with itself. I was not half Jewish and half English. I was fully both. The traditions did not subtract from each other, they multiplied. Let me give you a specific example of how this manifested. At school, we studied the Magna Carta. We learned about English liberty, English rights, the great tradition of English law, and English parliamentary democracy. And I absorbed this. I believed it. It became part of my understanding of what it meant to be English. But at home, we also studied Jewish law, the Talmudic tradition of argument and interpretation, the rabbinic debates that stretched back centuries, the idea that truth emerges from the clash of different perspectives. And I absorbed this too. Now watch what happens. These two traditions, English common law and Jewish religious law, they spoke to each other in my mind. They informed each other. The English respect for precedent resonated with the Jewish respect for tradition. The English love of argument resonated with the Talmudic love of disputation. I was not choosing between them. I was allowing them to enrich each other. And this, I think, is what saved me from the kind of fractured identity that can torment the children of immigrants. I did not experience my dual heritage as a problem to be solved. I experienced it as a gift, as a way of seeing the world stereoscopically, with depth and dimension. But I must be honest with you. This was not always easy. There were moments of friction, of course. Moments when the grayness of post-war England felt oppressive, when the casual anti-Semitism of the era stung, when I felt the weight of being different in a culture that valued conformity. The 1950s were not a time of celebrated diversity. The phrase multicultural Britain would not emerge for decades. What existed instead was a kind of grudging tolerance mixed with the expectation that immigrants would, eventually, become properly English and leave their foreign ways behind. But we did not leave our foreign ways behind. We could not, even if we had wanted to, because those ways were not foreign to us. They were ours. And here is what I came to understand. Slowly, over years. The tension was not a flaw. The tension was the point. Living between worlds, carrying multiple identities, navigating different cultural codes. This was not a burden. It was a kind of education. It taught me to see from multiple perspectives. It taught me that there is rarely one single truth, one single story, one single way of being. It taught me, in short, how to think historically. Because what is history, really, but the study of how people in different times and places made sense of their worlds? What is history but the recognition that human experience is infinitely varied, that identity is always constructed and reconstructed, that belonging is always partial and provisional. I did not know then that I would become a historian. I did not know that I would spend decades writing about the Jewish experience, about art and culture, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of who we are. But the seeds were planted in that gray London, in that household of mixed traditions, in that experience of being simultaneously inside and outside the dominant culture. I learned that you could love England without giving up your Jewish identity. I learned that you could be deeply rooted in Jewish tradition without being foreign to English culture. I learned that history, both Jewish and English, was not a series of disconnected events, but a living conversation across time. And most importantly, I learned that the gray world was full of color if you knew how to look for it. Let us return to where we began. That child in 1950s London, moving between Marylebone and Southend and back again, absorbing English culture at school and Jewish culture at home, learning to navigate multiple worlds simultaneously. That child was learning something that would shape everything that followed. Identity is not a problem to be solved, but a story to be told and retold. Each telling adding new layers, new meanings, new possibilities. The grayness of post-war England was real. The rationing, the bomb damage, the austerity, all real. But within that grayness, there were colors I could see that perhaps others could not. The vivid reds and golds of Jewish festivals, the rich tapestry of historical continuity stretching back centuries, the knowledge that I was part of multiple stories, multiple traditions, multiple ways of being in the world. And when I discovered that both Jewish history and English history were full of color, full of light, full of human drama and passion, when I discovered that history itself could be a kind of antidote to grayness, I found my calling. Not to choose between identities, not to resolve the tension, but to live in it, to explore it, to make it the foundation of how I understand the world. Because here is what I have learned in all the years since that gray London childhood. The tension of living between worlds, of carrying multiple identities, of being both insider and outsider. This is not unique to the children of immigrants. This is the human condition. We are all of us multiple. We are all of us carrying different versions of ourselves. We are all of us navigating between different communities, different roles, different ways of being. The difference is only this. Some of us learn it early. Some of us grow up knowing that identity is complex, layered, always in negotiation with itself. And perhaps that early knowledge, that childhood experience of being both Jewish and English, both different and belonging, perhaps that is what gave me the eyes to see that history is never simple, never singular. It is always in color. You just have to know how to look. Thank you.